Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is, of course, Evan Jensen. This show is always live and broadcast from our studios here in Johannesburg. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, well, we'll wrap up discussions after Labour Federation COSATU's two-day special National Congress that ended last night. We get updates from Burundi and Nigeria. There's a plan to create 80,000 jobs a month, every month, for 15 years. Here in South Africa, we close with a special focus on Egypt and then the Afro-Middle East Centre's book that was launched a little bit later, dealing with the Arab Spring. Should be quite an interesting interview. But first, let's get today's news from Newsroom.
Good morning, I'm Anine Dormal. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. The family of Archbishop Desmond Tutu says he remains in a stable condition in a Cape Town hospital. He was admitted for a persistent infection last night. His daughter, Reverend Mpho Tutu, says the illness is not related to his treatment for prostate cancer. The Tutu family is hopeful that he will return home from hospital within the next 2 days. The Food and Allied Workers Union FAU has confirmed it helped pen a statement after COSATU's Special National Congress calling for a workers' summit. The summit will include unions outside of the COSATU fold, a move widely seen as a step to decide on a new labour federation. Until now, FAU and other unions backing COSATU's former General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi and Union NUMSA, both expelled by COSATU, have ruled out leaving the federation. The DA has called on Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa to intervene in the detainment of South Africans in Inner Mongolia. The South Africans are among a group of foreign nationals who were arrested at Agros Airport on Friday. They were part of a group touring ancient China. Ramaphosa is currently on a state visit to Beijing. It has been reported that the first group of 5 South Africans will hopefully be returning home before the weekend. Meanwhile, Durka says it is in touch with the families of those now stuck in Inner Mongolia. In the north of Durban, a 55-year-old man claimed to be an IFP leader has been shot dead at Kwamashu Hostel. The suspects are still at large. Police say they are investigating the latest killing, but can't confirm claims that the deceased was a leader of the party in the hostel. The United States will soon submit a draft Security Council resolution to endorse the historic nuclear deal reached with Iran. Iran has agreed to scale down its nuclear activity in return for the lifting of international economic sanctions. The UN Secretary General has welcomed the agreement.
I know that an immense amount of work went into this, and I admire the determination and commitment of the negotiators, as well as the courage of the leaders who approved this deal that was so painstakingly worked out by their teams in Vienna and elsewhere.
And sprinter Wade van Niekerk has become the first South African to break 20 seconds for 200 metres. The 400-metre specialist surprised everyone at the European Athletics Classic meeting in Switzerland. Van Niekerk set the new national mark over the distance last night. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anina. South Africa's biggest trade union federation, COSATU, concluded its two-day special National Congress last night with more questions than answers, it seems. Despite a theme of unity for this gathering, some unions left the Congress intent on going their own way, it seems. The divisions within the federation have been evident for more than 2 years now, with the Congress itself showing the glaring fractures within the movement. Now, the Food and Allied Workers Union, FAU, has called for a special union and workers' summit with unions outside of the federation invited into the fold, a move that is seen as an attempt to give birth to a brand new labour federation that will be in competition with COSATU. Now, this morning I'm joined by economic and political analyst Israel Mkhize. Very good morning to you, Israel.
Morning to you and the viewers.
Thanks for joining us. Right. Firstly, just tell me, how do you read this call by FAWU? Do you see this new federation being born outside the umbrella of COSATU? Do you see it as a genuine possibility?
Well, we have to locate the current situation within COSATU in the context of the international left persuasion to find labor hegemony, to rediscover labor hegemony. You'll remember, I'll come specifically to the question you raised. You'll remember that in 1846, Marx put squarely the class orientation of the labor and so on. And in 1867, they then went forward in that capital pronouncement, the textbook, which is very important in this conference as well, where they analyzed what they call the bourgeoisie political economy. And then there they also outlined what they termed as the labor political economy. So there is always that tension of a search and contestation between the so-called bourgeoisie political economy and the labor political economy. But the most interesting period is 1902 and 1926, where there was a declaration of what is to be done, the search for what can labor movements and the leftists do once they get into power, because they will always contest with those who are persuaded with bourgeoisie political economy. So in this case, we are seeing the left, the labor-oriented, fracturing within. But they are not differing, if you notice, on fundamental basics as in doctrine and philosophies and ideologies. But you are seeing that there's now a distrust because there is a reconfiguration of the definition of the enemy. Who is the enemy? We would hear, like President Stumo Dlamini was saying in this pronouncement yesterday, that the enemy is still the so-called white monopoly capital.
Yes.
But some within the labor movement and within the left, here in COSATU and internationally, are saying no. But it looks like it's no longer a monopoly of the whites. There's also those who are black who have been co-opted. So there's a feeling that within the COSATU itself, there are those, perhaps in the leadership, who may have now been co-opted within the bourgeoisie establishment of the political economy, who are no longer pushing for the labor-oriented political economy. That's why you're seeing these sporadic, small break-ups. Hence, you find there's a conversation on who is the real left, who is really red. Is it the new faction led by Jim, or is it, for instance, is it EFF that is left? I mean, those who are in a proximity to bourgeoisie political economy or the state itself would label those who are sort of radicals and say, no, you are now being ultra-left. And then those who are labeled as ultra-left, they would say, no, but you are now co-opted within the establishment. So that tension of, Do
you see a future, though, of where COSATU will have to fight against another different federation for votes?
Well, I do. Of course, with the declaration of splits and the formulation of new unions, I'm sure those who fell out with Mr. Vavi are very, very observing the situation very closely to see who falls out here so that they can be part of the maybe disgruntled group that they could start something with, because you must also remember it's the strength of numbers. As you remember, within the accreditation debacle, the phrase that came out was the question of numbers. There's a strength of numbers. So you have the expelled affiliate with a lot of numbers. So those who have an interest of having a post-conference sort of regroup and reconfiguration are looking at those numbers that will fall out. Then they will battle right at the ground floor with the shop stewards and the factory for new membership.
We've seen in the platinum sector, we see it in the gold sector now, with promises being made to workers. Some call it unsustainable promises being made to the workers. Do we see an increase of this, more promises being made to workers in order to get votes, preying on workers who are suffering through tough economic conditions in the country right now?
Yeah, of course, we will. Politics is a game of rhetoric. you hear manifestos. Manifestos, in a way, sometimes are rhetoric. And you find that post-election, very, very few people would follow through on each and every detail. But this is the case, that with the established capitalist bloc, there is a wide feeling that they were able to pronounce a post-feudal system and civilization, and they followed through. But there's a feeling that within the left, there is no vision of a post-capitalism civilization that can be seen. So you find that in trying to conjure up followership and viewership, obviously rhetoric will play a big role just to co-opt and bring up numbers.
Finally, what would this, they're calling for unity, some say there was unity, others say there's a fracture. What do you call, or what would a new federation and what would the fracture and what happened at the Congress, what does it mean for the political landscape of South Africa going forward?
Well, it means that there's going to have to be a new political sociology of unions. If you go back in '89, Fukuyama wrote on the question of the end of history, and it declared that market will drive the world. But now, when you look within the left, production of knowledge, projection, in theory and in analysis, speculative analysis, you don't find something that is concrete that locates the left within particularly the globalization problem, as it were, or globalization realities. So you find that there's still a strong dependency on old, they'll be quoting Lenin, they'll be quoting Mao, but they don't jump to the reformers who came after those guys, your Gorbachev, your Deng in China, people who brought reforms that retook the countries which were hardcore communist and leftist and labor-oriented back into relating with other realities of international trade, which is what COSATU is going to have to face with to produce a new political sociology for labor and unions.
Well, I thank you for joining us. It's a discussion that I can continue with you for the rest of the show. Unfortunately, we only have the time constraints that we have. Economic and political analyst Israel Mkhize joined us this morning talking about, well, what happened at the two-day Congress with COSATU here at Gallagher Estate in Johannesburg the last couple of days. Very interesting. Of course, Dumo Dlamini, who is the president of COSATU, wrapped up the Federation's Congress with a declaration once again for unity. Here are some of your views with regards to that and what else would happen. Marty says, so the 8 unions who promised to loudly and fearlessly push the Vavi Numsa cause, only Fawu kept their word. Sanele Zondi says, workers need a new federation. COSATU is highly compromised. That one from Almaz Sitole. Luete Mkwane says, how can Stuma Dlamini talk unity when he himself is the leader of a faction in COSATU? Tsepo says, if credentials halts a Congress for 9 hours, clearly we need to work on the unity part. Yes, many questions. More questions than answers, some people say, about what has been going on in at the special Congress here in Johannesburg for COSATU. Now, yesterday, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni arrived in Burundi to try and help solve political deadlock there. Museveni follows in the footsteps of 2 other United Nations appointed mediators who failed in their attempts. More than 2 months have passed since the widespread protests against a 3rd term for Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza began in the country's capital, Bujumbura. Since then, the government has forged ahead with parliamentary elections in spite of widespread instability in the country and a tense standoff with the political opposition. Today, the Institute of Security Studies here in South Africa will look closely at Burundi's uncertain political future in their weekly View on Africa Google Hangout session that starts at 11 a.m. this morning. And to talk to us about what will be discussed, we are now joined via Skype by ISS Division Head Stephanie Walters. Very good morning, Stephanie. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
What do you make of President Museveni's visit to Bujumbura? Do you think it will bring any hope there?
You know, I think, unfortunately not. I think already, you know, Museveni going into this mediation is not the ideal person because of his own stance on term limits in his own country. We saw yesterday that he essentially did not really open the way for any kind of dialogue. He stuck very closely to the suggestion from the East African community, who in fact appointed him as mediator, which was made at their summit last week, that there be some kind of transition government, but at the same time that elections do go ahead within the next week. So I think that there's been some disappointment about what Museveni has really been able to effect.
Tell us about your discussion on Burundi today with your hangout session. What will be the key focus there? Are you looking at the parliamentary elections?
Well, essentially, we are, of course, looking at the parliamentary elections, and we're looking at some of the international mediation efforts that have been ongoing. We know that there have now been two United Nations envoys successively who have been repudiated, first by the opposition and then by the government. We're looking at efforts that the East African community has made. Have they made a difference? Can they make a difference? But most importantly, I think what we're looking at is where does Burundi go from here? Since we've had several briefings on View on Africa on Burundi, and every time the situation becomes more acute. I think that we can now really say that we are on the brink of a potential return to civil war. We know that opposition parties have said that they're not going to participate in the presidential elections that are being held next Tuesday. And this is a situation where I think the government has created the impression that democratic contestation of power is really not functional in Burundi. And in a country that comes so shortly after many years of conflict, I think the potential for a return to armed conflict is now very high. And that is something that we will be focusing on today. What is the likelihood of that, and what, if anything, can be done at this stage?
The United States, they share that sentiment. They released a report yesterday that said that the country's now, according to them, on the brink of disaster. How will that disaster play out when we talk about the humanitarian crises that will follow, not just there, but in the entire region?
Well, I think, first of all, what we're already seeing is a severe crackdown on anybody who supports the opposition protest of the third term. We've seen a staggering increase in human rights violations by the security services, but also by the militia, the Imbonerakure, that is close to the ruling party. So I anticipate that we'll see an increase of human rights violations. Obviously, that is going to intimidate the population, which will fear reprisals for a variety of different reasons. And of course, increased refugee flows in a region like the Great Lakes, where neighboring countries also have their own stability issues, notably the Eastern DRC, is going to cause further strain on already limited resources, both local and international. This is a region where there have been peacekeeping missions for the last 20 years in one country or another, where there have been refugee camps for longer than that. And so any kind of additional humanitarian crisis is going to mean a real strain. For Burundians, this is an absolute disaster. I think one can't overstate that. People are very concerned. They're very worried. They've been moving out of the country in large numbers for several months now, and I anticipate that pace is likely to pick up around the elections and afterwards.
Is it too late to avert the crisis, and what needs to happen if so?
Well, I think that, this suggestion that there be a government of national unity has gone nowhere, because essentially the opposition is saying that assumes that Nkurunziza can go for a third term. I think that is the key of the issue here. Whether or not you agree with the interpretation of the ruling party's interpretation of the constitution, and whether or not Nkurunziza should go for a third limit or not, the ruling party has seen the extent to which this has destabilized their own country. It has completely set back Burundi from years of consolidation of peace. And so I think that the question of Pierre Nkurunziza as the candidate for the CNDD is the key issue, but I doubt very much that the CNDD will make any changes to that. We're now 6 days out from the elections. The pressure is not coming from the African Union or the EAC on that particular issue, and so I don't think at this point that we're going to see any real change before the election, and so I don't think there's a chance that we're going to be able to avert this crisis.
Thank you very much for joining us today. You can join them on Google Hangout today. They'll be discussing, the ISS will be discussing, of course, the escalating crisis in Burundi. That was the division head, Stephanie Walters, joining us on Skype from an undisclosed location. But let's move on. We talk about our pick of the day now. It comes from South African Heroes, of course. It's captioned, "Congrats to Wade van Niekerk. Fastest 400-meter athlete in Africa. He's also the first South African man to break the 20-second barrier in the 200 meters. He did that last night, running 19 seconds, 0.94 meters. And to think about that, he won't even run the 200s at the World Champs. Right now, that's the third fastest time in the world, and he would win a bronze medal at least at the World Champs if he showed up. Think about it. Usain Bolt is probably not going to be there. Silver medal, but the two events are 30 minutes apart, and he won't be able to do it, he says. Now, let's take a look at the front pages from around the globe. We start in Europe. The Times reports a historic nuclear deal struck yesterday by Iran and 6 world powers, risk triggering an arms race in the Middle East. The West's allies in the region warned last night. Also in New York, the Wall Street Journal also leads with a nuclear deal. The nuclear deal reached with Iran sets off a furious political struggle in the U.S. and a diplomatic showdown with America's most important allies in the Middle East. Finally, in the USA, the USA Today says NASA's New Horizons spacecraft has made contact with Earth after what appears to be a successful flyby of the dwarf planet. Images and data should come in during the, days and weeks to come. Time for us to take a break now. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, South Africa's high employment rate is one of the main concerning factors affecting the country's progress, with the unemployment rate increasing to 24.4%. That's 0.10% increase from last year, and about 48% of our youth aged between 24 and 35 are unemployed right now. It is clear that this issue needs to be addressed very quickly. Now, collaborative stakeholder movement, together with Investment Solutions, will officially launch a jobs pledge today to celebrate Mandela Month. The aim of the pledge is to create 14,191,200 jobs over the next 15 years. This is the number of minutes Nelson Mandela spent in jail. This means that their job target translates into, as I said, just over 14 million new positions, or 80,000 new jobs a month. Now, joining us in studio is economist and chief strategist at Investment Solutions, Chris Hart, and the founder of Collaborative Stakeholder Movement, Mr. Martin Humphreys. Very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Very ambitious, some people would say, in the current economic climate in South Africa. Mr. Humphreys, if I can start with you, just give us your overview. 80,000 jobs a month?
Well, yeah, but we've got to start somewhere. And in management circles, we'll talk about measuring. If what doesn't get measured doesn't get achieved. So let's firstly understand what is it, where are we at? And we're about 15 million jobs currently in the economy. And we're currently, let's say, 10 million short. So if we could imagine for one moment where we would be if we had everybody was employed today as we sit. So let's project that over the next 15 years. we need about 15 million jobs. If we equate that to Madiba being in jail, we get to that exact figure of 14 million that you've quoted just now. So 80,000 a month, we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think what's important to appreciate is that if we said, okay, 80,000 a month sounds too many, so let's make it 10,000 or whatever. What are you saying to the others that we're then not thinking of a solution? In other words, as a country, we need to think of a solution for everybody in the country. So 5 million jobs in the next 15 years is telling 10 million people we're not even, we don't hold out any hope. So we actually need to look at a plan and an action for a solution for everybody in the country. That is the solution. That will fall short, may well be the case if we continue with the current economic climate. But the current economic climate is also transitory. It can change, and there's a lot of things that are within South Africa's power to actually change for the better.
In the State of the Nation address a little bit earlier this year, the President pointed out the 9-point plan to revitalise the Southern economy and create jobs. Are you looking to collaborate, or are you looking at that as sort of a blueprint for the industries where you're going to be targeting this increase?
Well, certainly about collaboration. I like to use the words integration and aggregation of existing efforts. There's some great stuff going on in certain sectors of the economy, and others are lagging. So what can we cross-pollinate? How can we work together? How can we work together between business, government, labour and civil society? It's everyone's problem. I don't think government has the solution. I don't think business has the solution. Everybody is rather fragmented at the moment, so we need to pull together as society. At the end of the day, it's a societal initiative. And then I'll also have to stress that we talk about figures and we do these things. We have an acronym, LCAD, which is engage. We have to engage. We have to listen to each other. We have to collaborate. And then most importantly is action and delivery. And that's what we're interested in. We want to provoke the actual delivery, take it beyond the talk shop.
Chris, if I open the business review papers every day, the sentiment's quite negative when I read things like the letters pages and the like. And in general, the outlook isn't always that positive in mainstream. How do we change that sentiment, and how do we get people to do the engagement and to kind of switch on a little bit, for lack of a better word?
No, I think you're quite right. The sentiment is down, and I think it's even declining. And we can see that with both business and consumer confidence numbers. They're both at a decade low, more than a decade low each, and they're still falling. To a large extent, it is internally driven. And one of the reasons that we are fracturing a little bit as a country is because of this thing of unemployment. Remember, unemployment, I believe, should be the top priority. What's happened is that other issues have been usurping job creation as more important. The Department of Home Affairs, for instance, with their visas, would rather see job losses in the tourism sector, which is one of our biggest sectors, 1.5 million people employed, rather see job losses than to see their issue that they've raised there. And this is what we need to do. We need to actually say if jobs are the most important priority, we need to actually then reprioritize and rejig the whole policy sphere so that jobs actually are the most important, not in word, but in actual deed. And there's a lot of things that we can change, self-inflicted damage, that we can actually turn around ourselves. It's not to do with a slowdown in China. Of course, that affects South Africa or the global financial crisis and that kind of thing. We're one of the one of the very few emerging markets where unemployment is higher now than it was in 2008. And the 2008, the global financial crisis hit everybody. The reason why we're lagging behind is because of a triple mistake that we're making. Strikes, we have to try and talk better around labour dispute, not to dilute worker rights or anything, but we just have to resolve it in a better way. Regulation and taxes that target capital formation, in other words, our seeds.
I want to talk about the strike scenario because we've just concluded the special National Congress where it looks like the labour movement is going to fracture itself in the months and the weeks and months to come. that kind of fracture and what we see are the kind of unsustainable promises that union bosses then make to the labour force. We've seen it in platinum, we've seen it in gold. How does that affect the overall outlook for the kind of project that you want to do, that and the South African economy?
One word, it undermines it. It's how do we take it from there?
How do we overcome it?
But if we have a rallying call around job creation, if we actually stand or understand the national emergency of unemployment and creating jobs, and I think that every decision that we take, whether to engage, whether to strike, whether to regulate, whatever we do, the key, what we're not understanding at the moment is what is the impact on jobs. That I think is the unifying force.
You see, and I know the issues of last year with the Platinum Belt strike and all that. I think the unions would be very upset if I said it lay entirely at their feet. But a 6-7 month strike is simply unforgivable almost.
Yeah.
And that needs multiple stakeholders to come together and speak sense.
Yeah.
But that was extremely destructive. We now have got a pipeline. One of the consequences is a pipeline and almost a jobs holocaust that's coming along, where we're going to see job losses over the next 2-3 quarters that may see, I don't know, 200,000, maybe up to 500,000 jobs lost, right, as people try and cut costs are busy rising. And so the irony with the jobs pledge that we're trying to say is that we're facing a precipice.
Yeah.
The possibility of those job losses putting South Africa into outright recession is there. All right. We need to now say, as stakeholders, these things we can turn around ourselves. The bad news, if we just don't do anything, we will see these things unfold. All right. Instead, if we actually start talking and actually say, well, let's do, make sense of the situation, we can turn the country around. This is a very high potential country.
It takes this kind of engagement, though, to bring it out. I often see South Africans inflict the worst pain on themselves, and we try and put our head in the sand and try and hide away from it. But I want to just conclude with you, Mr. Humphreys, and talk to you about this project, Mandela Month now. Yes, it's a Mandela Month linked project. Next year, Mandela Month, what would have wanted to have seen happen in the last 12 months?
I'd love to have seen 1 million jobs created, new jobs on top of existing jobs.
Fantastic. I thank you, gentlemen, for doing us. It's an absolutely incredible project. I love the audacity of it. I think that's what we need in South Africa. We need that kind of audacity to be positive and to make a contribution. I thank you for joining us. Chris Hart and Martin Humphreys joining us here today. Now, of course, Uganda's president yesterday began mediating talks between Burundi's government and opposition groups that are opposed to President Pierre Nkurunziza's controversial bid for a third term in that country. We spoke to the Institute of Security Studies a little bit earlier. They gave us their views. Here are your views now on social media. These are some of the discussion points with regards to the escalating crisis, as they now call it, in Burundi. Do you think civil war can be averted? The ISS, well, they don't think so. What are you saying? James Courtright says, regional leaders can't help defuse Burundi crisis when Kagame and Museveni are trying to stay in power beyond constitutional term limits. Kharabola Kortoto says, I suspect this Burundi crisis will end with some kinds of power sharing that have been quick and easy. Getaway in Africa. Eric Ntwari says, Museveni to play mediator role so that international community can let him lead Uganda at eternum. Burundi crisis not to end soon. Too bad, says Eric Ntwari. Wambui says, July 21st is the election date, but the people decided long ago that they don't want, even in the interference, they don't want Burundi 2015. Yes, 6 days to go to the parliamentary elections in that country. Of course, all the turmoil being caused by Pierre Nkurunziza wanting a third term. I nearly got up, but let me I thought I was going to go to a different camera there, but let me do it here rather. After taking the helm of Africa's biggest economy in May, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari this week replaced his Army, Navy, Air Force and Defence chiefs in a widely anticipated move. But as the former general has made crushing Boko Haram his top priority, there seems to be a new insurgence of attacks by the group. Now, to give us the latest from Nigeria, we are joined via Skype from Abuja by Nigerian journalist Peter Masham. Very good morning, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, South Africa. It's a pleasure.
Just tell us, how has Nigeria reacted to Buhari's latest move to replace the chiefs?
To be honest, a lot of us expected this to happen quite earlier. But I think there's a little bit of celebration in Nigeria because we have the new service chiefs now. Like you likely pointed out, I think the main aim is to defeat Boko Haram. And if you look at the appointments, you will see that General Buhari has gone for people he believes can get this work done. He's gone for people with intelligence background. And because the fight with Boko Haram now is not really fighting them as a force, they have gone into getting these young girls, strapping them with explosives and going into major cities and blowing them up. So most importantly now, the fight against Boko Haram is to get that intelligence so that we can be able to avert these explosions that in the last couple of weeks has been happening, especially in the northern parts of the country.
Now, the reaction from Boko Haram seems to have been to step up attacks to what's been happening there in recent times and the pronouncement made by Buhari. Do you expect the violence to escalate in the weeks to come?
I expect them to react definitely towards this appointment. But also we expect the service chiefs and those appointed to hit the ground running and to show that they deserve this appointment. It's so frustrating here in Nigeria because every day there's this explosion here and the explosion there. And the frustration also stems out from the fact that we don't even know what they want, that is Boko Haram. What is actually their problem? What is their demands? They're not really coming out to tell us what is the demand. So it seems we can't go into, if we had known what they want, we could probably say, well, let's go into negotiations and see how we can handle them. But they are not telling us anything and they're just bombing everybody. I mean, they are not sparing the Muslims, they are not sparing the Christians, they are not sparing anybody.
Yeah.
So we have to just take the bull by the horn. We have to go after them. We have to stop, gather those intelligence. We have to stop them. We have to anticipate their next movement, and we have to just get them and get them over with. I think that is the biggest frustration we're having here in Nigeria. We wish that there will come a time where all these things will stop. We're hoping that the Buhari presidency will bring an end, to these issues. But it seems even after he was elected, they've just carried on with their activities. But we're hopeful that with him in the seat of power and with the new appointments, things will gradually be better in Nigeria.
Peter, I saw yesterday that President Buhari is going to take a 50% salary cut. What are Nigerians saying about that?
Well, during his campaign, he promised that he's going to cut the cost of governance. And so he probably wants to show, he wants to lead by example. He wants to, put it out there and say, well, I'm taking a cut. So probably the senators and those in parliament should also take a cut. The governors and other government officials should also take a cut. But some people in some quarters say, well, he doesn't have the right to do that because it's already stated, down that this is what he has. But, Nigerians are happy, but we expect others to follow suit. I don't really think with his age, he's probably looking for anything right now. I think that's a saving grace. He's well over 70. I don't know how much he wants to earn right now. So the cut, it's a welcome development. And I'm pretty sure that those in parliament and those governors will also follow suit very soon. But we're happy here in Nigeria with this development. I think we need all the money we can. We need to save a lot of money so that we can inject in other sectors of the economy. And if Buhari has decided to take the cut for that purpose, then we're all happy here in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Peter. That's a nice update from Nigeria, telling everybody on the continent what is happening there. Well, the president's taken a cut. They need more money. Nigerians are saying let the oil price rise because that's been really hampering them. I think we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we look at Egypt and we look at a book that's been launched by the Afro-Middle East Center here in South Africa around the Arab Spring. Should be a very interesting discussion. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Didier Drogba, a footballer from Ivory Coast, was named as the third most influential celebrity in Africa.
Where I saw him display, he's a very nice player. He always make an impact.
Drogba donated his $5 million endorsement fee to the construction of a hospital in Abidjan.
Well, there are some lesser-known football stars in the continent that you haven't met.
Really?
And are deserving of more attention.
I think we will do better.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still with Newsroom now. The Arab Spring is known as a revolutionary wave of protests and civil wars that began in the Arab world in 2010. But while the wave of initial revolutions faded by mid-2012, there still seems to be ongoing conflicts on an even larger scale, with a continuing war in Gaza and Israel, Egypt's repression and possible revolution, the emergence of the Islamic State and Nigeria's Boko Haram. 2014 was certainly another year filled with instability and violence. The Afro-Middle Eastern Center has launched their latest book. It's called AMEC, or Afro-Middle East Center Insights, Volume 1, 2014. It's this book which takes a closer analysis of alarming events that unfolded over the past year. Now, joining us today in studio is the director of the Afro-Middle Eastern Center, Naeem Jina. Very good morning, Naeem. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Evan. Thank you.
Volume 1, 2014, what were some of the most important scenarios that played out in the year that you put in the book?
Quite a few. I mean, some of the big stories, I think, were Egypt, constitutional referendum, presidential elections took place there, etc. ISIS, of course, ISIS emergence and takeover of large parts of territory in Iraq was a big story and an ongoing story.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the onslaught on Gaza mid last year was another big story. Then we had elections in Turkey, elections in Tunisia, Libya, and the ongoing civil war, again a story that continues into this year. So there were quite a few big issues and big stories, and many of them enduring.
There's also Syria, of course, and the scenario playing out in Syria. I wanted to ask you about what's happening now with the Iran deal and how you see the Iran deal affecting Islamic politics in the Middle East when we look at Sunni Shia, Syria and Iran against the likes of Saudi, Iraq and so forth. How do you see this playing out post this deal?
Well, in some ways it's going to become much more exciting, not only among the Arab or Muslim states in the region, but all the states, including Israel, for example, which has jumped into this issue certainly last night, but even before. I think that some of the tensions are going to increase. The Israeli rhetoric against Iran will ramp up, even though they have had, in a sense, the rug pulled out from under them. Countries that are aligned to Saudi Arabia are going to take a stronger line. There's already talk that Saudi Arabia is looking at developing its own nuclear program, possibly moving towards nuclear weapons. And Syria, of course, I think is a big issue here, because there's lots of concern among Syrians that with Iran now becoming, in a sense, more kosher globally, that their situation is going to get worsened, because there'll be greater money flowing into the Syrian regime. Iran at the moment is propping up that regime, and if there's more money flowing in there, that strengthens the arm of the regime.
You see Syria as increasingly in the short term becoming the battleground, as it were, of Sunni-Shia conflict?
You know, I'm very wary of characterizing it in that way. I think the sectarian issue, the Sunni-Shia issue, has been used effectively by various role players in order to show up support for their particular geostrategic cause. So whether it's the Iranians and the Syrians allied to them, or the Iraqis on the one hand, or the Saudis and the UAE, etc., in order to for their own geopolitical purposes to get support, they're playing the sectarian card. So I don't think that Syria is really a sectarian issue. It's being projected in that way by everyone concerned, because it's useful for them. But I think that what we're seeing in Syria has been and will continue to be for a while the major kind of battleground proxy war, if you like, between the Saudi Arabia and its allies and Iran and its allies.
I'm about to cross to talk about Egypt. I just want your views around what's happening in Egypt right now. They're talking from protest to prison as the premise of the discussion. How do you view it?
Well, what's happening in Egypt at the moment is that you have a president in power that undermined democracy, had a military coup to get rid of a democratically elected president, and has, in the past 2 years, gone out of his way to ensure that all forms of dissent are silenced, whether it's the form of the former president, Morsi, or leftist groups, liberal groups, etc. All forms of dissent are silenced, people are locked up, etc. And the result of that is what you're seeing now, bomb blasts in the middle of Cairo, the Sinai region, which is virtually ungovernable. And I think that, unfortunately, that Egypt is going to continue down this road for a while, and ordinary Egyptians who have been suffering for decades will continue suffering.
Well, Naeem, thank you very much for joining us today. That's Director of the Afro-Middle Eastern Center here in Johannesburg, Naeem Jenna. Of course, the book that they've brought out, it's called AMIC Insights, Volume 1, 2014, and it deals with all the issues that we see in the news in the Middle East and surrounds. Very interesting book, and if you're interested, you should really have a look at it. But just a few weeks ago, Newsroom took a closer look at the current situation in Egypt with the Afro-Middle Eastern Center and discussed what seemed like the onset of a possible transformation. But 2 years after the ousting of President Mohamed Morsi, mass protests have been replaced by mass arrests, with young activists bearing the brunt of the unstable nature of the conflict and the economy. This has caused great concerns as the future of the country's bravest and brightest young minds seems dire. Amnesty International recently released a report titled Generation Jail, which focuses on the youth moving from protest to prison and what has been described as Egypt slipped back into repression. Now joining us via Skype from London is Amnesty International's Egypt researcher, Nicolas Piachot. A very good morning, Nicolas. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Nicolas, just give us your view, the rise of the mass trials, what it means what does it mean for the country, especially if hundreds are now going to be condemned to death?
It means there's very little hope for human rights and the rule of law. What we're seeing is a criminal justice system spiraling rapidly out of control and treating peaceful protesters like terrorists. Let's look at the death penalty. The death penalty is being used to purge the political opposition. Last year we had over 500 death sentences. Almost all of them were against alleged supporters of the ousted president, Mohamed Morsi. This year we've seen 7 executions of Mohamed Morsi supporters, 6 of them following a grossly unfair military trial in which the men were tortured to extract confessions. This is not a criminal justice system which is working independently and impartially. This isn't justice. This is a vendetta.
Are any moves afoot in Egypt to deal with those who shouldn't be imprisoned, that have been imprisoned during these mass arrests?
Well, the president likes to talk of amnesties, that he's going to pardon political prisoners, including some of the sort of leftists that we've seen put behind bars. But the truth is, today, anybody who speaks out against the authorities is a target and is at risk. That's true if you're a Muslim Brotherhood supporter, but it's also true if you're a young student protesting on campus, or if you're even an award-winning human rights defender. The truth is the authorities have shown no mercy in their crackdown and no tolerance for dissent. We've seen journalists detained alongside hardcore Muslim Brotherhood supporters, and of course we've seen peaceful Muslim Brotherhood supporters locked away simply for protesting in defense of the ousted president.
As you're reading the situation at Amnesty International, you've got 30 seconds to tell me how long before we see another revolution in Egypt?
Well, what I can say is the authorities are making very sure that there's not going to be another uprising in Egypt. 2011's Generation Protest has become 2015's Generation Jail, and the authorities are making sure that no new generation of protesters rises to challenge them.
Well, Nicola, thank you very much for giving us an update on Egypt. That is coming to you live from London via Skype. Of course, Nicola Piachot is, he's the Egypt researcher for Amnesty International, and they're talking about from Generation Protest last year to Generation Jail, of course, the mass crackdown that's been happening in that country, post the Mohamed Morsi era. We'll keep you updated what happens not only in the Middle East but also in the rest of the African continent. Of course, don't forget the Afro-Middle East Center's book is called Insights Volume 1, and it deals with all the conflicts in North Africa, Middle East and surrounds, of course. That's where we leave it today. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Jam-packed, lots of time, very little time really to kind of get it all done, but at least we did. Newsroom is broadcast live, of course, from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Don't forget the show repeats, of course. No, the show doesn't repeat. I'm talking nonsense. We don't repeat. We're on YouTube. That's where we are, live on YouTube. This is SABC News. You've been watching the show, Newsroom. We love it in the morning.